Hello, welcome everyone to the Work From Home show. I'm your host, Nikki Weisgarber, and today I am joined by a leader in employee engagement. He's a professional speaker, educator, and a community builder. He has worked in employee engagement in over 8 countries and has written 4 books on employee engagement. I consider him an employee engagement expert for sure. So welcome, David Zinger.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks for coming on and contributing to the show today. I'm really interested to hear, about your background. So you have a background in psychology and psychology, employee engagement, and what's happening in the world today is really quite intertwined. So I can't wait to kind of get into the meat of the show here. Before we kind of get started, you have quite a robust career history in employee engagement, and I only scratched the surface of it in the introduction. So I'd like you to share with the audience and myself your background and kind of like how your background led you to where you are today.
I guess the short answer is I have a background in counseling psychology, teaching at University of Manitoba for 25 years, while also being the employee assistance counselor and career development coach for Seagram up in Gimli, the world supplier of Crown Royal.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1990, I first encountered William Kahn's article on personal engagement. I was taken by the article upon very first reading, and who knew that it would take off at the level that it did, but I did see it coming. I did see that that engage word was very powerful, and it talked about a real strong connection. I turned 65 in September, and on March 30th, I applied for CPP and old age security, and it was the quietest retirement ever. I just filled out the forms and thought, oh, I guess I'm retired, but not really. In a strange way, I see myself, and I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, and you're the kind of one of the first people I've ever mentioned this to. I see myself fulfilling the role of an elder of engagement. I've been around engagement for 25,000 hours. I've been around the world in engagement. I have nothing that I need to prove. I have nothing that I'm specifically striving for, but I would like to bring out the good in people and work. And so in whatever way and whatever fashion I can do that, whether that's speaking, writing, coaching, I'm there.
Yeah, a mentor for sure. We'll have to talk after the show.
Okay.
All right. So right now everyone is going through this massive transition with the pandemic. And some of us are managing this change well, and some of us not so much. I was reading some of your articles, and you had this article on managing the circle of transition, where you talk about tapping into that psychology experience of the changes that you're going through. And essentially what you're saying is you identify them, you like name them, and then the outcome of that process is to hopefully understand what you need to navigate through these ups and downs. The article was focused on, how individuals can kind of take those steps and navigate through that. I want to talk a little bit about from an organizational level and from like a leadership and managerial level on how we can use this circle of transitions to support us and our employees and our organizations.
First and foremost, it's really important. I very much concur with William Bridges that a transition begins with an ending. And frankly, we suck at addressing endings.
Yeah.
We really aren't good about it. We avoid it. We're nervous around it. We're emotional around it. I'm not only talking individually, but organizationally. William said the biggest failure of all organizations around change is the failure to recognize who is losing what because of the change. And I think if I could advise one thing as a leader, is take some time to talk to people, whether it's now or whether it's 2 months down the line. What have you lost in relationship to roles, routines, relationships, and assumptions with all the changes that we've encountered? The big fear is if we go there, people are going to get stuck there. But my experience in counseling has shown me the way out of something is through something. And as long as we shuffle it off to the side, as long as we ignore it, as long as we try to whitewash it or paint a real positive and optimistic scenario, I think the longer it lingers. I've never liked positive thinking. It just seemed too Pollyannish. I never liked negative thinking because I think there's enough troubles already. I do love constructive thinking. And what do we construct? I'm not talking here the silver lining, the opportunity in crisis. Many times I see those words bandied about and they seem disingenuous. But I think at a certain level, there is transformational coping. There is experiences. People are going to be very changed by their experiences of work, and some of it's going to be very, very constructive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to go through that process. It's almost like a grief. We're going through a bit of grief process right now too. And so you got to go through each of these phases. And I think that if you are, if you're, some of us are self-aware and kind of understand where we are in each of these phases. But I think you do need to kind of step back and kind of think about what has happened over the last, few weeks that we've been in this pandemic and working from home, going through these transitions, identify with them and say, I'm going through this, I am struggling, and just be in the moment with that. But then think about, what are the solutions around that and how can I get out of this for sure? So from an individual level, what are like some things that teams can do to support their leaders or to support their organization? So kind of reversing the questions. Organizations can support their employees and support their, leaders, and how can, those individual contributors support the organization and the teams or the managers and leadership?
It's, how do you add value? How do you bring value? You talked about grief, and the person who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on stages of grief has done some revisions and added a sixth stage called meaning. He even used the term find meaning. I don't think we actually find meaning. I think we create meaning. What are the meanings that I need to create out of this? There is the opportunity right now, because of the stage of flux, for some fairly large scale and small scale innovation, that you can maybe be more innovative than you ever could have before. If you're an internal communicator, you may not need 6 people to sign off on something that you're communicating within the organization. Us doing these kind of videos, I mean, generally organizations would want a studio and this and that and the other thing, and we're working from home. So there's lots of things you can do. What I personally do a lot of is I work in 11-minute, 11-second time zones, or what I call an E-zone or engagement zone. The single biggest contributor to engagement for knowledge workers, which are almost all of us, is progress. Because I work in such short time zones, and I may string 15 together in a row almost, like just a small little pause between each one. I see progress every day. I've got a book. And what I do is I just write
Very neat.
each period I've done.
Yeah.
I've done that for years. And so that, I don't get stuck. There are days in this process you're going to feel stuck, and that's just normal. But don't let it become chronic. And so progress is one of the ways to really handle setbacks. And so I've really worked in very tight time frames, and that keeps me quite productive.
Yeah. I was talking with a colleague the other day, and I was telling her I'm very much the person who needs to strike things off my list. So I'm a list maker.
Yeah.
And if I am not striking things off my list, then I don't feel like I have accomplished anything. And so over these last few weeks, I haven't striked a lot of things off my list, but I feel as though that the items on my list are bigger projects, and I need to think about those in smaller bit-sized pieces. And I think that comes back to the psychology part around it too, right? I know that I'm aware that I'm a check mark list scratcher. And so I need to take smaller chunks from my bigger projects so that I feel like I am making progress and I am actually, providing some value in my day and in the week, so I don't feel so overwhelmed. Do you agree with that? Does everybody kind of go through that like shift?
Yeah, It's quite variable. I used to work with procrastinators. I worked with 2,000 procrastinators at the University of Manitoba. It's such a big issue 30 years ago. One of the recommendations that one person had was called the unlist. Because many times, if you create a list and you don't accomplish, you feel like it's been setbacks. So for instance, in that list I showed you, that list is only created after I've completed something. Uh, so before, like generally I work in 3 intervals at a time. So uh, I'll write down, okay, for the next 11 minutes, I'm going to do this. And after that, I'm going to do that. And then the third one I'll do then. And after those 3, I kind of pause and then create a new list of 3 things to do. By creating an unlist and writing on it as you complete it, you once again see more tangible examples of progress. So I like listing, but I know sometimes in the past when I have a list and I don't get it done, it becomes quite disengaging.
Yeah, it does come. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Because you don't feel like the value is there, and so become disengaged with the work that you're doing because you're feeling like you're not creating that value or making that progress.
Yeah.
So, what are some lasting changes to leaderships or organizations that you think might come out of this current crisis?
How the hell would I know? Um, I've been contemplating this. I've been thinking about it. I think there's still so much that needs to come. But here's some of my hopes. Um, I hope it compels things to be more genuine, more personal, more real, well, also getting results. I mean, as we come out of this, many organizations are struggling for their economic viability. We must achieve results, but never in lieu of relationships. Uh, Results get done through relationships. And so I'm hoping that leaders, and this is a really tough ask because your brain doesn't tend to function on both channels well at once, that you can work towards achieving results while building relationships, that you really bring things together. I believe and have believed, and there's good academic research behind, work can make you well. And so I want to help people become well through their work, not in lieu of their work, and find pathways to well-being in the work. You know, maybe this is going to move us away from a focus on pizzas and all the other, and I like those, don't get me wrong, that's just icing on the cake, but to really authentically experience well-being through the work, you know, positive emotions, engagement, relationship, meaning, accomplishment, strengths. When those 6 variables are there inside the work, it's like a well-being program. And I think that's one of the ways that we navigate, and leaders need to do that for themselves, while also helping other people accomplish that, and really being attuned to the improvisational nature of much of what we're going through, while having a sense of the results that they're trying to achieve. So I think leadership has always been a big ask, and now it's going to be even a bigger ask. And so some kindness and compassion towards themselves and others, and what goes on. I fear that some workplaces will very much go to, look, we're teetering on economic failure here. You just got to double your efforts and
Hmm.
work harder, and bully mentality can start to really take hold, not because necessarily the leader is inherently a bully, but they're so fearful and they're so pressed to get those results that they may be having a lacuna or a blind spot to the human being element of it. So it's like that proverbial statement, he got off on his horse and rode off in all directions at once. I think we're going to see that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so what would be kind of your best tip to start to take those steps towards being more empathetic from an organizational level? So you're not getting towards that fear that you're kind of in that bully mentality. So what are your best tips there?
Oh, I guess one of the best tips is psychological safety, to be able to hold conversations and authentic conversations. Uh, Edgar Sheen, he wrote a book called Humble Inquiry, and really said we need that humility because we depend on people. Leaders are very dependent on the people they lead.
Yep.
There's not the old day where, okay, here's what you got to do and how you do it and follow me. I mean, you don't know everything. You can't do everything. You're dependent on those people. So to be able to learn and to recognize that you're part of it. You know, I've been on lots of Zoom calls, as many of us has been, but on one Zoom call, one of the women said, you know, it's very strange on Zoom because I see myself in the group. And I think that's one of the most important things for leaders is to see themselves in the group.
Hmm.
You know, one of the things that always used to it just stunned me in my work in employee engagement, how infrequently leaders recognize themselves as being employees themselves. You know,
Yeah.
it was those people or the people, how do we get more engagement? Well, you are part of it.
Yeah.
And what you do with your part may be as influential as anything that you advocate or say.
Yeah, no, true. And you know, I lead a team at Kudos, and I'm always like, how do I? And they're much younger than myself, but how do I engage with them? And how do I, you know, what are the steps that I can take to make sure that I'm engaged with them and they're engaged with me, because it's a reciprocating relationship, right? And so I always look for those opportunities to try to be engaged with them, because I am an employee. I'm a leader within the organization, but I'm still, at the end of the day, I'm still an employee. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit more. I think I want to talk a little bit more about, you know, what's happening now. You know, your psychology background, employee engagement, and how it's all intertwined. I just want to open up the floor, and I just want you to spew out what your thoughts are, and just give her.
Well, there's so many directions I could go, but because I touched on psychological safety and that's getting increasing attention, a lot of people don't understand how therapy worked. Like, how does it work that you'd go to a therapist and you talk and they listen to you really well, that you're better? And I was puzzled by that, frankly. But one of the people I worked with, David Martin, uh, he really explained it well. He said that there's a lot of anxiety in why people go to counselors. And the ability to talk about what they're going through so they start to experience the anxiety while they're with a therapist who makes them safe extinguishes the fear or anxiety. So there's a lot of anxiety, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity in leadership roles, the ability to create safety. Um, and you know, I used to teach crucial conversations. It was a company called Vital Smarts out of Salt Lake City, and I probably taught it 80, 90 times, sometimes in Calgary, frequently in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But in many ways, I used to say it's a safety course, and I was really interested in how did safety get created, and really the way they articulated, and I would agree with that. Psychological safety is created when you know I care about you, and I care about what you're interested in, and you have a built-in shock-proof shit detector that in about an 18th of a second can determine whether that caring is genuine or not. Whoa, that's a big ask of
Yep.
leaders. That's a big ask of leaders. So you're told to care, and hopefully you do care. You care about the person, you care about what they're interested in. If you do, you can talk to just about anyone, just about anything.
Hmm.
You can really open up that. But people, you know, please, if you watch this interview, don't manufacture caring. It really has to be authentic or real, or otherwise it's creepy, and it's probably worse than just being a bully, because
Hmm.
then the person thinks, I thought they were a bully, but now they're kind of acting like they care. Now it's just a creepy bully. So it's a pretty big ask, but you know, counseling has just taught me so much about how people see the world, and how they do it differently. You know, I'm often asked in relationship to what's going on, how do you make sense of it? It reminds me, many years ago, my wife and I went to India, and we came back to Winnipeg, and a number of our friends who had never been to India said, what was India like? And the best answer I had for them was there is no India. There are many Indias, and they reside maybe a foot or a meter apart from each other. Same thing with COVID and what's going
Mm-hmm.
on. There are people who are just working so much and people who aren't working at all. There are people who have lost friends, family members, and there are people who really, they're screaming at the government to let them be free to roam through the parks. There's so many perspectives, and it's so easy to get locked into thinking, well, the way I make sense, that's the right way. That's
Yeah.
the way it should be. The ability to kind of increase your capacity and think, okay, let me at least understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
One final statement. I was very empathic as a counselor. That was the primary tool of my trade, and people really needed to know that understanding doesn't mean agreement. Uh, because I understand you, because I work hard to understand you, because I work hard to understand what it's like for you and your world, doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with it. I might have another perspective. And I think for some leaders, being able to really demonstrate understanding is really vital. And many times they think, well, but if I understand it, they'll think I agree with it. And that isn't necessarily so.
No,
Or
I
or
think it's
caring, just one final one.
yeah.
Caring is so key, but there's another cute word that I love. It's called carefrontation. Out of a stance of caring, you need to put things in front of people. If people are struggling with productivity and it's jeopardizing the economic well-being of the organization, if you don't put that in front of them, if you don't have a conversation, if you don't make them aware, then you're enabling that
Mm-hmm.
behavior.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to when you understand, it means that you're listening to what they're saying. You're not agreeing, but you're listening. And I think that's
Yeah.
extremely important as well. You're there to listen and you understand what they're saying to you. And you're there to support them and guide them in the direction that they're comfortable with, and give them the tools and the kits to execute on whatever that might be. So I think listening is extremely it's part of caring as well, right? Just being a
Yeah,
good
and
listener.
And will you have your mind changed?
Hmm.
Like, you're not really listening if there's no possibility of your mind is changing. If you're
Mm-hmm.
just waiting for the other person to finish and then you want to go. So real listening and real connection means that at times you hear something, learn something, and you change your mind
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah. No, good points. All right. I want to also touch on the 5 zingers on how to successfully work from home, since we are in this transition and we're
Yeah.
working from home, and it's not on our accord. So the first one is do it your way. Tell me a little bit about do it your way.
Find the way that works for you. Like, if doing laundry while you're working helps you work, by all means. Some days, if you need to lie down on the Chesterfield for an hour or two, maybe that's right. If you work better at 3 a.m. and you don't have to work in uh, synchronicity with someone else, you can do it at your own time frame. That might make sense. There's too many people out there telling people this is how you're supposed to work at home. It's
Mm-hmm.
a bloody tyranny of tips that frankly irritate me.
Mm-hmm.
um, Give me suggestions, give me how you're working, let me know what's going on. But even the Buddha said, be a lamp unto yourself, which meant, as I understood it, is say, let's take meditation. um, there are many meditation teachers that tell you you got to sit cross-legged and hurt your knees, and you got to have a perfect posture,
Posture.
and
Yeah.
you've got to be and hell, I sit for 11 minutes and 11 seconds in a lazy boy chair, and sometimes I focus on my breath, and sometimes I look at the wall, and sometimes I create a shopping list.
Yeah.
Um, it's the way that works for me, and I think we need to respect our own process.
I agree with that. And that's what I like about your list, because it isn't the typical, like I think you mentioned in the article, the commandments, right? And so that's what I like about this list. So I hope the audience enjoys this list as well. So the next one is view this experience as an experiment.
You can view all of life as an experiment, but I think if you say, well, let's just experiment. If I try working this way, or I try doing this, or I try more of this, what's the result? So don't worry about having it all right and all figured out. Conduct an experiment and see if it's effective for your well-being, or for your productivity, or for your connections to others. So it's a brilliant opportunity to experiment, and many workplaces are going to change how work is done,
Yeah.
from not trusting people to work at home to saying, well, why are you coming into the office? You
Yep.
got so much more done at home. Why are you here?
Yeah, though I think that a lot of organizations are going to find that some of their employees are more productive working from home, and some are more productive being at the office. And that is something that, that will be something to look at on the other side of this pandemic for sure. And I also
Well
think that the
said.
talent pool is going to open wide up with the ability to work from home or work from wherever you are. So I think there's some great opportunities coming out on the other side of this pandemic for sure.
Can I
Um,
stop you for 1 second?
yeah.
What you say resonates with something I'm really believing. I'm shifting my focus and engagement from employee engagement to work engagement. I'm really following the academic lead of Arnold Baker and others out of the Netherlands. I think as organizations, if we can teach people how to engage in their work or in their task, we give them a framework or a skill or a perspective that's portable.
Mhm.
Because some people aren't going to get back into their organizations. They're literally going to have lost their job.
Mhm.
And yeah, maybe it was great that they rated you 10 out of 10 as an employer of choice.
Mhm.
But maybe more importantly is maybe you should have taught them some skills about how to engage in their work. So now that they're going to be creative, or they're going to be self-employed, or they're going to embark on their own, they have a skill set that's transferable. And we failed. We
Oh.
really failed in employee engagement at doing that. The academics did it, but they failed in being so cryptic that nobody reads them.
Yeah.
Um, so
Double-edged
so
sword.
it's one of the things I feel pretty strongly about. There's some brilliant things out of the whole field of work engagement that needs to come to the foreground, and needs to come fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And probably this would be the time to take a look at those things. While people are, take a look at, your processes or even your goals as an organization during this time, and figure out what are those, and what are those business outcomes? What do you want from the employees? How do you get your employees more engaged? And think about these things. So this is why we're having these conversations.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah. Thanks. So the third one is make memories. And I love this one.
Well, I've worked from home for 45 years. So I'm thinking, what are all these people doing in my space? Not in my home, but everybody's working at home now. The circumstances are very different from choosing to work at home to being compelled to work at home because of a virus that's out there and can devastate healthcare workers and elderly, and just about anyone with that. But I had 3 children under 2 years of age. We had a
Wow.
1-year-old, then we
Twins.
had twins,
Yeah.
and I worked at home. It was crazy. It was like crazy. My daughter, the twin, the boy and the girl, she barely slept.
Yeah.
Like I would be up most of the night, and it wasn't like my wife and I could trade off.
Yeah.
And so at 8 o'clock, sometimes we'd get someone to come in and help us, and I'd sleep until 10 o'clock. But frankly, the memories I have with my children and being home and seeing what goes on, I mean, for many of us who do go to an office, or we commute, sometimes by jet for a whole week or 2 weeks at a
Mhm.
time, and if we have families, we can miss all kinds of elements. And so making memories, for me, first and foremost, if you're a parent, is with your children, but it can be with your partner. It can be like if you garden, or other things in your house, is seeing and noticing them. Even just over the last little while, because I'm probably home even more than I'm usually home, sometimes just the way the light comes into my house, it's kind of interesting. It's like, wow, look at that light, or look at, all of a sudden, a plant is being lit from behind my house, and yet the sun is on the front of the house and it's actually bouncing off my neighbor's window and coming in. And it's it's the most ephemeral and tiniest of memories, but there are those moments available, and some of them, first and foremost, would be family and with people,
Hmm.
but there's also tangible and other things for people who are completely on their own, and there's no
Yeah.
one else around.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's just stepping back from my busy, hectic life to actually appreciate these moments, and just being with my family. Because both my girls are involved in hockey, and hockey is extremely busy during the winter, and we're go, 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 go. And then we do soccer in the spring, and then swimming, and yada, yada, yada. We're like we're I think it was like 80-20. We were 80% out of the home the majority of the day, 20% at home. And now it's completely flipped. And this is a very like different environment for everybody. But for me, I think it's been really good to just reflect on, the moments that I'm spending with my kids. I'm actually now a teacher. So that's my new profession.
You
And
know,
teaching them, and I get to understand how they learn, or how they grasp certain concepts, or how they just interpret certain things, so that I can be a better mom when they go back to school. I can be a better mom and support them in their learnings, and teach them, different strategies on how to solve problems or whatever that might be. So I'm going to take that as my memory.
fantastic. You twigged something for me, because of hockey. My son, the other twin, the boy twin, Luke, when he was 8, was a goalie on an elite team. And I have a background in psychology and dabbled in sports psychology. And one day I asked him before he got into net, I said, Luke, how do you handle the pressure? How do you handle the pressure of being a goalie? And he says, oh, when I skate towards the net, Dad, I say to myself, I'll see what I can do. And literally, that statement floored me, because it's curious, it's open, and it's egoless. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I'm going to do the best, I'm going to win the game, I'm going to stop lots of shots. He just said, I'll see what I can do. And I've had national team players from Team Canada Ringette and from Finland, and people stay with me, and I've offered them that. And I think for your daughters who play hockey, if they can go on the ice and say, I'll see what I can do, it creates a very open mindset to perform at your best. And I just want to bring it back to working from home
Mm-hmm.
and doing new things, is can you, before you approach each new task or each new endeavor, just maybe say to yourself, I'll see what I can do. It was the brilliant wisdom of an 8-year-old that a 65-year-old father is still hanging on to this day.
So that's great. That's a great memory too. And I think there's a lot of pressure on a lot of employees, to produce, right? And so when you say, I'll see what I can do, I think that statement, I love that statement, because it is very open and it's very agile. And it basically says you are going to try your best to produce, and whatever that might be. But I think people are afraid to say that because of the perception of what that actually means. Um, but I'm giving people permission to say that. And I think you
Well,
are too.
I love that you said it's agile. I hadn't thought of it in that context, but it is very agile, and it
Yeah.
it, it is so open, and it doesn't prevent one from doing their best or doing absolutely the best, but also the person, you know, progress engages, setbacks disengage at 2 to 1 more powerfully than progress. When you say, I'll see what I can do, and it doesn't go well, you're probably going to be more resilient and
Mm,
bouncing back
yeah.
after a setback.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Okay. Number 4, be mindful of your own engagement.
Yeah, pay attention. It's engagement isn't a measure that's done once or twice a year. To me, engagement is something living and breathing, moment to moment. It's your connection to your task or to others or whatever. Just show up. Uh, Pay some attention. Is how engaged am I? Is my engagement dropping? Do I need to do something to help me connect, or do I need a recovery period? Um, or is this task, is there something embedded in this task I need to look at? Maybe someone else can do it, or I need to change how I approach it, or frameworks or whatever. So um, It's the idea that engagement changes moment to moment. Like, every 11-minute, 11-second period of work I do, I'm engaged in every one, but sometimes the level of engagement is higher than at other
Mm.
times
Yep.
along the way. And I think we just pay attention.
Yep. Oh, good tip. And number 5, if you can laugh, you can last.
Yeah, it's I laugh on my own a lot. I see the humor. My master's thesis in counseling was on humor in counseling. It was really because I laughed with clients, and sometimes other counselors would hear me in an office with a client and would be laughing, and then I'd come out and they'd almost look at me and say, "What? Like, you're a counselor, what the heck is going on there?" And if you can laugh, you can last. It wasn't a psychologist, it was someone wiser than a psychologist. Charlie Chaplin said it so well. He said, life is a tragedy in close up and a comedy in long shot. And the question becomes for each of us is, how long does it take us to get a long shot? That does not dismiss the tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
In hospital after hospital around the world, there are people dying, and there are healthcare workers who are risking their lives on a daily basis. And I would venture to say you would hear a lot of laughter around there to cope with it and to
Mm-hmm.
manage it. It would never be disrespectful of the process, but if you can't laugh, you can't last.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you can, you got to find some joy in the day, some joy in life. And yeah, you're right. I recently read a comment on Facebook, and it was somebody was commenting on the nurses and doctors, I think, had made a video about dancing, and they were just like happy. And somebody had commented saying, during a time like this, do you think that this is the time to be laughing and dancing? And I stepped back from that comment and I was like, why not? Like, they are surrounded, like, they are surrounded by, this tragedy all day long. Why can't you take a moment out of your day to actually do something fun and do something that is going to make you laugh? Because those endorphins are going to come out and you're going to feel that much better. So that when you're done, you're dancing and you're laughing and you have to go back to the tragedy, at least you have a better outlook, and maybe your mind is a little bit more clear to support those patients.
Yeah,
So
and I think it's important from a leader perspective that you don't engage in forced fun.
yeah.
I think it's an invitation. I like, a lot of my humor is just playfulness. Like, I have humor as I write things because I play with them. I write things in an article that I know when the article goes out, it would never be in there, but it just keeps me a little bit entertained or bemused
Yeah.
by what's saying. I got to be very careful in my editing process along the way. So I just caution that sometimes people hear about being playful, and it's like, okay, everybody, show us your socks. And
Mm-hmm.
you know what? Some people love to reach out and show a sock, and they've got something real neat on there. And some people, they really don't want to show socks. And I think
Mm-hmm.
as long as we say, here's an invitation, those of
Yes.
you who are interested and want to show socks, and if you're really repelled by socks, you can just turn away for 2 minutes or
Yeah.
something.
Okay, great. Those are great 5 tips, and I love those tips because they are not the traditional ones that we know we have been hearing over and over again. And you did mention that you like to keep some comedy in your articles, and I know that this article specifically you talked about an elephant in a river. I was wondering if you could just tell that story quickly.
Oh, that was fantastic. We were 2 of my children and my wife and I were in Thailand many years ago. We actually went to a tiger temple. With all the stuff on Netflix with the Tiger Kings. There's
Yep.
the same kind of thing going on in Thailand, and so I won't talk about the politics and the ethics of it. But
Mm-hmm.
you saw but you also got to go for an elephant ride, and the elephant walked right down to the River Kwai. And I remember the River Kwai from a war movie from a million years ago, the bridge over the River Kwai. And you're riding on the elephant, but the elephant plays with you. And so what the elephant does is try to buck you off. And he got me off. And my wife was still hanging on, but I was off the elephant. And then the elephant had a bowel movement, and I was downstream in the River Kwai with elephant dung coming towards. I've never swam so fast in all my life. You know, they talk about, there's a phrase often used, the elephant in the room. Oh, the elephant in the river is worse than the elephant in the
That was a great story, and I liked how you started that article off with that story, because these 5 tips and this transition of working from home is the elephant in the room, and these tips are out of the norm, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. And so thank you for sharing those tips and that article, and we'll be sure to share the website where they can find these resources as well. Before we kind of get into some of the wrap-up questions that I've prepared, do you have any sort of last comments or thoughts or insights that you want to share with the audience today?
Well, there is a lot of talk about normal and the new normal, and will things ever be normal again? I think if we can make friends with the unnormal, not the abnormal, but just the unnormal. You know, I've been influenced by psychology, but also Eastern psychology, and I have a profound respect for a sense of many perspectives in the East of being comfortable with impermanence. If you really master a sense of impermanence, probably what we're going through isn't as big a deal for you psychologically to go through. It can be a big deal because of loss and other things with it. I never want to minimize things. I have this great interest in Tibetan sand painters. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but 3 or 4 monks may spend a week making the most beautiful mandala, 1 grain of sand at a time. And you talk about being engaged in your work, it's phenomenal. They did it at the Winnipeg Art Gallery years ago, and I would go almost every day to watch them for a little bit.
They are hunched over.
Yeah,
it's
that's
so
exact.
detailed.
But what do they do at the end?
They wreck it.
Yeah, put it in a bag sometimes and dump it in the river.
Yes.
Well, can you imagine if you can work like that? If you can work on a project and then someone from Kudos say, no, we're no longer going with that. Many times we hang on to that for like 3 months. My God, I worked so hard on that and it's gone. But there it's a kind of a sense of, can you work without a sense of it having to be permanent?
Right.
And nothing is permanent in essence. So whether you want to or not, it already is impermanent, but it's hard to make friends with that.
It is hard to make friends with that. And that story resonates with me. And I think I need to make friends with it. So that's one tidbit that I'm taking out of this conversation for sure today. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate your insights there. I've just prepared some small wrap-up questions. Okay. So if you had to choose from the 5 zingers that we just talked about, what would be your number 1, tip for working from home or getting through this period of time? You also have experience working from home for the majority of your career, so I'm sure you have some great tips there as well.
Well, the tip is only for me because I don't want that tyranny of tips. Is humor and playfulness. Humor and playfulness is my number 1 signature strength. When I'm aware of my humor, I have a higher level of well-being. When I express my humor, I have even a higher level of well-being. And when I use my humor in the service of others, that is one of the biggest contributors overall to my happiness and well-being. So because it's a fundamental strength of mine, it very much is there for me. And once again, I guess we go full circle, do it your way. You need to find out either experimentally or with a hunch what seems to work for you and see. Let it unfold.
Yeah. Oh, good one. Is there anything that you're binge watching on Netflix or Crave? Anything you're sort of diving into right now while we're social distancing?
Well, Tiger King, because of my times in Thailand, and Ozark, we just finished it, and Capture. I thought Capture, I think that was on Prime with the use of video and what was going on was interesting. I find Life in Pieces has posted some new episodes, so that's good for a bit of a lighter perspective. But I come to lightness pretty naturally. So what I've kind of enjoyed is the series with mystery or some element, and it really kind of pulls me through. Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes for a couple hours at night, we need something to pull us through. My wife is managing the COVID call center for the province of Manitoba,
Oh,
and to
wow.
set it up and to run it, it was like 12-hour days.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have very many cases in Manitoba. Touch wood, I've got some
Mm-hmm.
wood right here. Um, so often when she got home after 7, we'd have a little bite to eat, and then we'd watch a couple shows, and that really was a good chance to unwind. It's a little bit too much TV for my liking
Mm-hmm.
overall, but it's also been a good way to get through things.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I feel like I'm on the computer all day long and then I end up binge watching something on Netflix. I'm like, oh, this is way too much screen time. But can't help it. I'm into Ozark as well, so I really enjoy that series. Is there a book or a podcast or any sort of like learning resource that you can recommend for our audience today to continue developing their employee engagement skills or how they can tap into that for their organization?
There's so many books. Just to go back in time, Teresa Amabile on the progress principle, it got a fair bit of attention, but the shelf life of books is very short. And I think, particularly for managers, to understand the fundamentals of progress. Uh, Personally, for me, very strangely, I've never had a science background. I've arts and psychology and that kind of perspective. I've become very interested in virology,
Mm-hmm.
the science of it, not.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I could never really understand it. And there was a course from Columbia University of 13 or 21 lessons on virology, and I'm working my way through it, and I'm absolutely fascinated. Although I never, at 65, I'm not about to become
Yeah.
a virologist. And they have a podcast, and so it's interesting to it's been interesting to me to hear the scientists and the medical people work because of the level at which they're sharing information. They're so experimental and open at what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They debunk claims when claims need debunking, but they will test claims if they think that there's some potential efficacy of it. And so to hear this on a weekly basis, it's called This Week in Virology. uh, if you really want to tune into it, it's
Yeah.
quite technical. But to just listen to how it unfolds, they've had a doctor from New York who's very active in the hospitals. He comes on the show about once every 2 weeks or something, and just talk about what they're trying and why they're doing this and how they're moving the patients with this and what's going on with steroids. Like I take Flonase for allergies, but it's a steroid, and
Mm-hmm.
steroids in the first week of COVID is not a good thing. In the
Yeah.
second week, it may be called for. So it's fascinating how they kind of puzzle through it. And if we could bring that spirit in our own recovery, in our organizations, in our
Mm-hmm.
communication with each other and between organizations, then, and if I could play a small part in that, I would almost fulfill my role of being an elder of engagement that
There you
I've kind
go.
of imaginary given myself that title of.
That's great. Well, David, again, thank you for so much for coming on the show today and providing your insights. And I really appreciated our conversation. I think we're almost at an hour here. I probably could talk to you for like another hour, but maybe we'll save that for another podcast.
Sure.
Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please leave us a 5-star rating. And until next time, stay wise, stay connected, and stay healthy. Thank you, everyone.